Hi everyone, and welcome to this, the first webinar in the University of Portsmouth BusinessTalk series. We've taken our event online. We're particularly proud to do this during current times when we're dealing with the effect of working from home during the sort of COVID-19 pandemic and all the implications from that. We have a number of speakers today, specifically to talk about maintaining well-being, both if you're an employee and if you're an employer of employees, throughout this COVID time and the impact of working from home. We have a number of speakers. So first speaker we have is Diane Gilmore, is from the charity Working Families. I'm just going to hand over to Diane and ask her to introduce herself.
Yes, of course. Nice to meet everybody. I'm Diana Gilmore from Working Families. So we're the UK's work-life balance charity, and what that means is that we work with employers right across the UK, supporting them with their policies, their processes, their culture, to have an environment that supports work-life balance. So obviously it's very sort of topical in the current situation we're in. We also have a legal team that has a free helpline that staff can call in if they've got any queries about anything, any struggles that they're experiencing at work, that they can call in about. And we have a policy team as well. So we're quite well known, I suppose, for some of the policy wins we've had over the years, the right to request flexible working, shared parental leave. They're all policies that we're very involved in sort of pushing through. So yeah, we're basically a point of contact really for employers that want to get advice and support in shaping their policies and their support for their staff. And that's, yeah, we've been going for 40 years, so quite well established.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Dan. Also on the call we have Sue Beebe, beg your pardon, who is CEO of a company called the HR department. Sue, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon everybody. Yes, my company is called the HR department, and we provide outsourced HR services to small to medium-sized enterprises sort of throughout the Sussex and Hampshire region. Deal with a whole raft of businesses, from those taking on their first employee up to those with about 100 employees, and just advise on anything to do with HR. So contracts, handbooks, handling disciplinaries, sickness, absence, and anything at all to do with HR. We've been going for 6 years, but I've personally been in HR for sort of nearly 30 years. So there's not a lot I haven't seen in my career, but I've never seen this, actually, the COVID-19. So it's the first. So yeah, so that's the HR department.
Thank you, Sue, and hopefully we'll also be joined, if she's experiencing a few internet connection issues, by Professor Sarah Warren, who is Professor of Organisational Studies and Human Resource Management at the university, and she'll be able to give us her opinions on the questions that you have sent in. So how is today going to work? Well, the intention is not to make this presentation, not to make this a lecture, and to make this more of a question and answer session. So we have a number of questions that have been sent in advance, and we also have people who are able to chat and send us comments and thoughts, and we'll be gathering those all together. So we're going to start by going through the various questions, and we also have some polls for you all to take part in. Two fairly simple polls. One, if you're an employee, which is about whether you're comfortable working from home and giving us an idea of how you feel about that. And another one, which is all about if you're an employer and how comfortable you are in terms of your employees working from home and how it works for you. So we will put those back on at the end so that people can participate. But for now, I think we'll dive straight into the questions. And we've categorised them for you. And so the first section is really around well-being. And the first question that has come in from a local Solent business is to ask, how do I encourage staff not to overwork and to take regular breaks? So I think this is a question that's probably relevant to both of our current speakers. We'll go to Sue first and ask that question. In your perspective, looking at current HR practice and now remote HR practice in terms of COVID-19, what would you recommend?
I think it's around the manager's modelling good practice here. So if you're a manager, making sure that there's a pretty clear structure to your employee's day, actually sort of advising them that you expect them to take a break, you expect them to have a lunch break, and there's a clear start and end time. You know, we don't want managers emailing or telephoning staff outside of what would be normal working hours. We want them to be keeping pretty clear to actually this is a day's work, and not contacting staff outside that unless it was an absolute emergency. but actually that sort of modelling. And some companies I know even go as far as their IT departments can put a ban on emails being sent outside of a certain time to be on the company system. And that's always good practice. I think if you're sitting at home with your laptop, it's good to put that away, put the lid down, put it in a drawer when you've finished your working hours, and then don't look at it till the next day. So trying to get the people into good working practice, I would say.
Okay, thanks very much, Sue. Diane, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I'd agree with that definitely, Sue, as well. I think one of the things we would talk about at Working Families is supporting organisations with things like workshops. So you could have, watching out for the risk of sort of burnout and stressing colleagues is something that could be obviously identified perhaps if you have sort of lunch and learn sessions with your staff, looking at the risk of stress and how to spot a colleague that maybe might be struggling, which you can pick up on in a simple conversation with a member of staff. Some of our members that we work with a lot of employers as members, and they actually train staff as what they call mental health ambassadors. So they have companies that come into their business and train their staff on, again, how to watch out for these signs of burnout, which means also those individuals are easily accessible. So their details are shared on the whatever the server is in that organisation, and so that people can approach those individuals if they're struggling. Also, just a couple of notes here. Again, I agree very much about what Sue was saying about signposting breaks, making sure staff all have on their out of office their working hours, that that's clear. If they're not working, they use their out of office. And there isn't that feeling that they have to be always on. Something that Working Families did last year, we carried out some research on this culture of always feeling like you've got to be on. And I think when you're working from home, having those clear boundaries of knowing when to switch off is vital. And you've got to be careful about that. Also, I think making sure you don't loop people out of important meetings. People are going to be having to be more flexible with their hours. They can't be as accessible all the time, but obviously if there are important conversations coming up, it's very important people don't feel disconnected. So do try and schedule times that if people can't make that vital meeting, make sure you take that time to debrief them or follow up with them so they feel included, because obviously in the current situation we're in, it's very important everyone does feel engaged and part of all the decisions that are going on and that might affect them. So I think it's just bearing that in mind as well.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think there's some really good key points there, particularly around those people who aren't in teams where perhaps there is a lot more structure and making sure it's changed. And that's really good. The next question that we have actually had specifically also around well-being, I think it's from a manager, which is around, are there any tips of getting a team who are all in remote locations working to a harmonious set of routines? And I know I myself have a team of about 10 people who work, and obviously they've all got different responsibilities, and particularly in COVID-19 times, they might be caring for different groups of individuals. So I think probably, well, again, we'll go to Sue first. In terms of that, getting the team working together, even though they're in different locations, what are your thoughts there?
I think the two ways is there's having a scheduled meeting where everybody drops in for the same meeting, whether it's a coffee morning, coffee time, maybe once or twice a week where the whole team gathers together, or a wind down session on a Friday afternoon when everybody gathers to sort of keep that sense of team. But also the line manager really should be having, I think, a check-in with the individual team members on a daily basis. Just doesn't have to be a big check-in like you would do in the office, literally just calling, just dropping by somebody and just having a quick chat with them. I think that's important, just to keep that sense of we are still part of this same team. So I think definitely having things scheduled in and the regular daily catch-up, so that they feel part of a team, but also communicating, keeping the communication link going about what is happening to the business, because you don't want to be in the loop of all the bad things that might be going to happen down the line, but just an update of where we are with things. Well, X number of staff have been furloughed, you are working from home, or we've no plans at the moment to change anything, we've got a new client coming in, or we're ticking over with clients. So just keeping people aware of what's happening with the business generally, so that they're not at home and worrying all the time about where this might be going. So they'd be my tips. Yeah.
And you raised an interesting point there, actually, Sue. So in terms of team, because it's about team harmony, if you've got a team where some people have been furloughed and some people haven't, how do you as a line manager deal with the fairness of that, particularly where the function is similar?
Yeah, I mean, it's very tricky. Business owners, the choice is absolutely with them who they furlough and who they don't furlough. As long as there's no discrimination involved, they can pick half the team to furlough and half the team to keep working, depending on what the roles are, the experience. That's probably how they'll select them. And really, the team that are furloughed, there can't be any work done at all. But there's nothing to stop you having a social meeting once a week with the furlough team where literally no work is talked about, but literally, let's have a catch up what's happening in everyone's sort of private lives, personal lives, that want to have a chat about what we've been watching on telly this week. But you can't talk about work, and you've got these two different teams. But don't forget the team that is furloughed, but don't bring them in on any work. I think that's the key message there. Otherwise, your furlough payment as a business owner may be in jeopardy. So, yeah.
So that's I think another interesting concept that you raised, and I've been interested in Diane's perspective on this, which is actually almost using virtual technologies to emulate some of the more frivolous aspects of office activity. So not the structured work, but perhaps the bits that make human life happen, that coffee morning, that bit of gossip, or that little bit of opinion-based stuff that happens. What's your kind of thoughts on that, Diane, particularly with that unusual thread of perhaps bringing the furlough people back in on that non-work related communication?
I think that's vital. I think this idea of kind of keeping aligned with your company culture is very, very important. So, if you're, as an organisation, if you had a sort of tendency to always have a quick catch up before a big pitch or a big meeting or a big presentation, or if you have colleagues that you always used to go for a Tuesday coffee with, you can still do that virtually. And I think maintaining those habits that are routine, that normalise the kind of working environment you're in a very, very kind of what feels like quite an alien time for a lot of people, I think is very, very important. You can still do that to kind of boost morale and that reassuring sense of normality. I think, it's very difficult to fully have harmonious routines working, because the fact is, in a normal situation, people might be able to, swap shifts or cover workloads or support each other. But actually, in the current working environment, that the rules have gone out the window. Not everyone has the luxury even of a tag team setup where one partner can kind of parachute in and handle the children while one's working. Everyone has very different responsibilities, and obviously people who have children have got other responsibilities affecting them. So I think it's every day is going to be different. So what works one day is not necessarily going to work well the next. And I think those productive pockets of the day that people have, where maybe they can catch up very early in the morning on work or late at night, their sort of line managers have to be mindful of that as well, so that the routine is has to be for it to work properly. But I think the other thing is like positives, that if there was a routine of regular communication from the senior management team, maybe having weekly sort of updates from them about anything positive that can be shared at the moment, I think is vital. If there is any projects that have moved forward, perhaps they can encourage team members to share with them anything that's been going well across different divisions, and share that with everybody. That just gives that reassuring feeling that business is continuing to some degree, and it includes, as you say, those people that have been furloughed who aren't privy to everything else can at least share in some of the positives and some of the interaction within the organisation.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think one of the questions that's come through from somebody is about team members who are struggling to separate workload. The phrase that's been used is lockdown anxiety and family issues. And actually, this is framed quite nicely from a line manager saying, what can they do to actually support that member of staff in trying to deal those issues? And I think this is probably a nice one to go to working families, to Diane first, because it is about that work and life balance. And I suppose, be it COVID-19 times or normal times, what would working families recommend for someone who's trying to support somebody who is struggling to maintain the work-life balance?
Well, I think it's having that understanding with your staff. Again, you know, with the flexibility, with the fact that, so with team meetings, when people dial in, you know, it's normalising the fact that people might need to duck out of a meeting early. You know, their child might run in, their dog might be barking, and it's making it not an issue that those things are going to occur. Something that we advocate is having regular drop-in dial-in sessions across the week, so that not everybody is going to work, it's going to be able to manage to attend all those meetings. We have them ourselves, you know, our CEO is normally there, members of staff join when they can, but if someone needs to duck out early, it's not a problem. And by making sure people are aware of that, then they don't feel that unnecessary pressure to be there, to be present for everything. I mean, there's lots of suggestions we've got with that as well. I mean, certainly to make sure you can, again, watch out for anyone that's really struggling, that risk of stress and anxiety. I think encouraging people to use sort of video conferencing. So when try and encourage people not to mute themselves, not to take, you know, to remove their picture, so that they can have that human interaction with their colleagues and their line managers, and having that communication directly with line managers regularly, so they can talk about where they might be struggling or where they might need support, and just keep that communication going constantly. You know, you could have regular feedback sessions, whether that's every couple of weeks, which is purely to talk about positive experiences, shared ideas with your peers, and also with your line manager about what's working well. You could have even perhaps a network set up for well-being purposes, you know, where you have, if you use something like Microsoft Teams, you can have a particular group on there that's all about sharing non-work related stuff, you know, all the fun anecdotal information, sharing news stories, funny, quirky information that is positive. And also, you know, we're all in this together, and I think it does help people. It reaffirms that view that, you know, we're all in this together and we're all going to kind of support each other through that.
Okay, that's really helpful. Last question on well-being, which I think probably crosses both HR and welfare, which is someone says, what would the panel advise to staff who don't have the luxury of an office or an office setup environment? So the kind of people that are working at the kitchen table, or perhaps potentially worse on the sofa. What sort of steps should people be taking to make sure that doesn't become detrimental to their working environment? So I think I'll go to Sue first.
I mean, it's a basic fact that any employer who has an employee working from home should get them to undertake a risk assessment for working at home, and it's sort of a checklist of everything that should be in place if someone is working from home. And there is a big section on posture about, have you got a table, have you got a desk, have you got that sort of space? And clearly most people should be able to find a table, hopefully somewhere in, you know, the right sort of surface. But the point is, you have to do the best you can, I think, in these circumstances, because the alternative to working from home is to be furloughed. If you can't work from home, then you have to be furloughed. You can't do any work. And I think a lot of employees don't want that. They want to be working. And so I think the first thing is to have the risk assessment that actually highlights what the difficulties are and what they can try and do to get around that. And then just being clear, really, it sort of puts the onus on the employee to actually understand that you can't be working for a long time in an uncomfortable position with your laptop on your lap, say, trying to do lots of typing that could have an impact on your health down the line, you know, with your neck, your back, your wrists and all sorts. So I would say make sure that that risk assessment is undertaken to start with, and then if you are able to identify an area, you know, sort of a table, then I think making sure that becomes clearly marked at certain times as the office space. And if anybody else is in the house, that, you know, mum or dad or whoever are working at that office space at that time, where there's a sign up that says I'm in working, don't come near, or, you know, trying to manage it. I mean, it's really difficult in some, you know, tight spaces, obviously, but I think it's about doing the best you can, but keeping healthy. And because if this goes on for a few weeks, people could start to get some injuries from you know, not working in the right way. So that would be, from an employer's point of view, making sure that you get hold of those risk assessments. Health and safety executive have them online that you can print off, or you can email to your team members to get them to look at them and then highlight any particular issues that you've got there.
Yeah, I think we'll provide the links to those when we put this out later on social media. Is there anything you wanted to add, Diane?
I think that's very, very key what you said there, Sue. I think just to add probably is that, you can get creative. A lot of people don't have the luxury of a studio or a shed at the bottom of the garden, or a spare room, but you can create that sense of your working environment. If you've got children, for example, you're juggling as well. You need a space for them to play. You need a learning space. Some people we know have converted their shed into an area for study, but equally for having that space to work, you make use of areas of where you live that perhaps are underused. There might be space under the stairs. I've come across people that have put a desk in there, or make use of your dressing table. Just be a bit creative about that area that you feel comfortable. Also things like the booster, make sure you have a good Wi-Fi connection. You might find if you're suddenly working from your bedroom because your partner is working from downstairs or has taken over another room, just make sure your connection is good, because obviously that's important. It might require investing a little bit of money in just making sure you've got the tech suitable. And I think also something, just bearing in mind, if you're going to do a lot of online conferencing, like we're doing right now, then you might want to have somewhere that you feel comfortable being in that environment. The background's okay, the lighting's okay, and you've got a space that you feel comfortable. Like Sue says, you don't want to do your back in, and it needs to be safe, but it needs to also work for you, where you're going to be able to kind of work at your most optimal level. So yeah, that's all I'd say on that. I think
Sue wants to add something.
Yeah, just pulling off what you said, Diana, there, it just prompted me. Obviously, with data protection, if you're using laptops at home, then making sure that they're closed down when you're not working, so that no little hands are going onto your computer and getting into information, maybe pinging it somewhere. You've got to protect your data that you have at home as well. So it's quite clear that, making sure that there are good rules around that with your laptop.
Okay, that's all good. So, and probably an obvious one in line management terms is how can I be sure that staff are actually working from home? And I suppose this speaks to that balance of trust versus activity and operational behaviour. So let's take this question from a positive perspective, perhaps just trying to make sure that staff aren't overloaded and anything else. How do working families recommend that they look at how whether staff are actually doing the work that they're being given?
Well, I think we would focus primarily on, presenteeism is something that obviously we come across a lot with employers that we work with and the ones that we support to help combat this. Now, hopefully one of the positives of this awful situation we're all in is that people will start to see the true value in flexible working, remote working, and how that staff can be incredibly productive and engaged working in that way. So I guess it's very much shifting that mindset for line managers to understand how productive their staff can be and to embrace this new way of working. The mindset that you need to be face to face, or you're shirking if you're not at your desk, is obviously a very old-fashioned view. I think it's important for line managers to be clear with their staff. How do they want them to communicate with them, and when? Do they want them to maintain that weekly call? Do they want them to send them regular email updates every other day, or do they, how do they want them to engage with them? The clearer they can be with the boundaries of what their expectations are, how has it impacted projects they were working on, in terms of targets, in terms of deadlines, all those things to quite a large extent by the current situation. There's a lot of delays that are going to slow down projects. So they need to be clear with their staff. They can't assume their staff are going to be going to know this. So by clarifying, how they want them to communicate with them and when is very important. They can assess their productivity in a multitude of ways. They'll be able to see from the conversations they're having and from group meetings and activity what's going on. I think also it's worth something we do support organisations with is supporting line managers with the business case for flexible working and understanding how to manage a team that's working flexibly. Not all line managers are experienced in maybe managing people working from home. There's different issues that can come up. They may not be fully perhaps embracing how this could benefit their organisation, that actually it could be a more effective way of working as opposed to just a benefit for their staff. And I think that's something that is important also for staff themselves, understanding how to work. If they've only ever worked for a few hours a week from home, this is a whole different ball game. So you might need to look at some lunch and learn sessions for your staff who are working now in this manner, but also for your line managers, I think, just so understanding that everybody's sort of on the same page. I think also keeping that positive morale. You know, there are going to be delays to things. There are going to be understandably things in the pipeline that might have been bubbling, might now be not as forthcoming. So, you know, do share as the line managers, you know, as the sort of the gatekeepers to that positive morale within the organisation. They can set the tone by maintaining that positive mindset and showing that, you know, this is business as usual. We can be very productive and very effective still, and they need to kind of role model that out to their staff and their teams.
I'm going to jump from that because I think it's related to one of the HR questions we've received and sort of put it towards Sue, which is somebody who's I have a performance at work issue. These conversations are difficult via video, and on what steps would the panel recommend? So I'm linking the two together, I suppose, because we've gone from a positive, how do you monitor the activity, but moving in the direction of the activity is not there. And I imagine this is a big thing for a lot of managers who are used to being people in a face-to-face meeting, step into an office and have a conversation. So in that scenario, whether either you have an emerging performance work issue or a very established one from your perspective, what's the important things to remember? What do you recommend, Sue?
Yeah, I think just sort of also following on from what Diana said, I think employees need to be realistic, because if you've got a 3-year-old at home because your nursery is shut down and you haven't got anybody else to look after that child, then, you know, are you actually able to perform effectively when you're trying to childcare at the same time? You know, so employees have got to be realistic and understand that maybe they actually need to say, look, I can't actually perform fully at the moment because this is my circumstance. And Furlough has been set up specifically as well for people who have got childcare issues and they are doing childcare, and that is a reason to furlough. That's just an aside. But I think as far as performance goes, I think if managers set time-specific tasks, you know, as you would normally, if you're setting a time-specific task, then you're able to actually check that somebody is performing and you know, that you've set it at the right level. It's a two-way thing. Have you set the deadline too tight? You know, why haven't they achieved it? Or actually, are you giving them too much time? They're actually much more effective at home because there's no disturbances and they're really getting on with it. What we'd always say with performance management is it's about being on top of it really quickly. So if you're having these regular conversations, whether by phone or by video link with your member of staff about the work they're doing, then don't let things simmer. If there's something that's not actually happening well and you're not happy, say it straight away. You know, just say, look, is there an issue around this? Because I just sort of feel this is slipping. Is there something happening? You know, what do we need to do about this? So I would say it's exactly the same as at work. It's always trying to tackle things straight away instead of being afraid to tackle them. I know it's different circumstances and people might be thinking, managers might be thinking, oh, I'm a bit worried about raising because I know they've got all these issues at home, but it's always best to raise it. And then the employee may well have a good answer to get around it, and it's all out in the open. So I would say no difference in performance, managing performance. Just tackle it really early and get it out there and make your expectations clear as a manager, what you want doing, but take account of the employees' comments as you normally would.
Thank you very much, Sue. And probably a similar one actually. It's quite a long question, but similar vein. Someone said, I'm a people person. Part of my style is to observe staff and manage on an as needs arise basis. I value being able to gauge team members' moods and needs. What are the tips for continuing that management style through remote working? I think I'll go back to Sue initially because I think it probably the two things cross over nicely with each other.
Yeah, I think it comes back to that, having those regular meetings, whether it's a weekly coffee morning where you're getting a sense of the mood of them, of the team as a whole. But also I think following on from what Diana said, if you feel that there might be tensions building in a team, maybe using a wellness action plan, which is something where the individual employee sort of sets out in writing the sorts of things that are stressing them or making them feel unhappy at work, what makes them feel good, what the manager can do, and being able to start that conversation around saying, my morale's slipping a bit, or, how can I build on this? So I think I would say it's all about just maintaining contact. And I think we have covered this with those sorts of meetings and one-to-ones that even if it's not work related. One of my clients, they have something every day at 5:30. They have what they call face wine, where they just stop work and they have a glass of wine if they want a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, and they just sort of get together and have a chat every day. But it's not necessarily about work. It's more about what's on telly this evening. We finished work, and it's that sort of thing, I think, that will keep the team together.
I like that. I like the way that it gives some closure to the day as well, and almost giving an acceptable moment. Is there anything you'd like to add, Diane?
I think that's very covered a lot, really, but I think exactly that. I think it's understanding that also working remotely like this, not everyone's used to it, and okay, you might typically want to be a bit more hands off at times and not be on top of people, but I think you've got to be that bit more direct, and things could be misinterpreted sometimes, I think, working virtually. And I think if you get a sense perhaps somebody's not quite responding in the right way to something, taking something the wrong way, it's very different in an office when you could just walk past a water cooler and say, oh, sorry, so-and-so, I hope that wasn't taken badly. This way, I think you need to kind of pick up the phone a bit more as well, and just even a 2-minute conversation, I think, can make that member of staff feel very connected and feel better about a situation. So maybe you need to be that bit more hands-on than perhaps is even natural for some line managers, perhaps, just to allow for that. And also mindful that some people are not, don't always, they might be living on their own completely. They may be single, they may be working from home, they may be feeling quite isolated, and they really need that human contact more than just an email or a text. So I think it's being hands-on is useful. I think that was, and again, the feedback, just making sure that you kind of keep the feedback coming, keep that communication going between line managers and their staff and their teams, and doing the fun stuff like you say, Sue, and having, you can't have those Friday drinks anymore, but you can still have a virtual quiz. You can all dial on to one of the apps that we're constantly being sort of sold to us, and have a fun game and engage with your staff and do social things. So I think you just have to be a bit creative, but also just make maybe more of an effort than perhaps you might have done previously.
Yeah,
that's where you put your hand up there, Sue.
Yeah, I was just going to add, and you prompted me again, Danny. You mentioned earlier about having the sort of team talk where you have the unofficial, jokey stuff that the team might talk about. But we always need to remember maybe the older member of staff who lives on their own, who won't engage in that, and actually not engaging in that can make them feel even more isolated. And the managers need to be on the lookout for that. Who's not joining in? How can I get them involved and make sure that they are involved in, all the time with what we're talking about? And that might be more formal structure that they need, but it is keeping your eye out for those maybe completely isolated, and it could be a bad time for them. So, yeah, but everything you said.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to add to that. Is that my finger? Yeah, just add to that as well, Sue. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you might also have members of staff, who have elder care responsibilities, who have challenges at home. They might have children with special needs or problems. So I think it's also maintaining those, you might have done all those supports anyway, and have those kind of support structures in place that those individuals can access. But obviously currently these people are now isolated, but still having to take on these burdens of responsibility that they've always had, whatever that is. And I think it's also continuing now more than ever, the support that you offer those members of staff who might need that support. Yeah.
2 questions to go. So I'm going to go with a bit of a procedural one, and we'll come to Sue, which is probably something that some firms are experiencing and others not so much. I'm looking to hire someone during lockdown. What should I be thinking about that is outside the normal recruitment process? Or I suppose, putting it another way, what have I got to do differently because I'm doing it remotely?
Yeah, I had to think about that when I saw it's probably very little now, because so much recruitment now is done can be done remotely and is often done remotely if people aren't local, by video calls to have interviews rather than somebody having to travel to come down. So all of the usual procedures would be in place, such as, the people applying online as normal, shortlisting, interviewing on the screen, and then undertaking references and any checks that might need doing online, and then sending out offer letters. So I don't think really that there's going to be a lot of difference. The only difference I can see is where you might normally get a group of people together to see actually how they work as a team. So sometimes you have an assessment centre. If you've got certain jobs or certain groups that you're looking to recruit to, and I think that would be an issue. And you might then have to divide questions that you ask as part of the interview. But if you're asking what are called criteria-based interview questions, which are all about how did you react to this sort of situation, what would you do, but what have you done in the past to try and really get to grips with how somebody really does behave, then that would probably be your way around that. But I just don't see very much difference in lockdown. But I've yet to see a company that's recruiting, is all I'd say. I don't know where they are, but low and short time, and a lot of hospitality looking to come out the other side, really. But staying positive, of course, they are.
I suppose the only one as a line manager that occurs to me is how people might perform the right to work check.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that the care sector have obviously had to do that because they are recruiting a lot of carers at the moment. They've had to get people in, and also for this for the new volunteer scheme that's in place now. So they've done sort of like a fast track scheme where it's scanning documents in rather than seeing the originals initially. So yeah, they've had to sort of tweak it slightly, but you would down the line have to make sure you've got documents.
Okie doke. Thank you very much, Sue.
You froze.
Oh, sorry, big problem. Yeah, the very last question then, which I'll go to Diane first. I think it's a life balance one, which is, I think it's quite nice to end on a positive. How do I empower people to be creative and put forward ideas in a distance working environment? So I suppose this is for those companies that, and I get a bit of this in university, it's not a question of business as usual or repeating the same old process. Actually, you're starting projects, you're doing new things, or you're potentially even looking to new markets at some point beyond the COVID crisis. How do you do that, brainstorming that innovative work?
I mean, I suppose really, I think for people to be truly creative, to have that kind of culture where people could be innovative, come up with ideas, I guess it still falls back to, you need to create an environment where people are engaged, where people feel positive, they feel happy, and they feel they're in an environment where they can share ideas and they're not going to be sort of shot down. Because coming up with a great idea that can be developed, you need support to make that happen. So I would actually say that to create that sort of environment where you're working virtually, it's no different to obviously when you're not working virtually, but I think what the current climate is doing is it making companies have to perhaps look back at dust off those kind of sort of code of ethics that they had, or whatever the core values were that were important to their company, so that when you work for that organisation, what does that mean? What is your culture? And I think kind of having your SMT sort of kind of almost being the flag bearers for the core values that you're about. How do you identify somebody that works for your organisation? What's important to you as an organisation? And I think you can actually encourage open conversations and use your kind of open forums to include all areas of the business at all levels, to engage in brainstorming sessions, in discussions, and make it very clear that these are unprecedented times. There's an element of people feeling perhaps a bit more liberated. They haven't got that awful commute. They are able to sit around in comfortable clothes, and they have perhaps got a bit more time. It could be that as projects are slowing down to some degree, you might have members of staff who are quite skilled in other areas who would love to pilot, test drive a new idea that they've been talking about, maybe banging on for the last year, but there wasn't really time to see that through. Some companies are allowing organisations time to actually have a few hours to work on projects that might be of value to that business. And this might be the time to kind of encourage that. You can also turn it into a morale booster for the company. You can have competitions and the best idea of the month, and you can run initiatives off the back of kind of creating an environment that sort of is in keeping with whatever the values are, because it's important to reinforce those. I think it's important for line managers to make their staff aware that they've got an open door policy now more than ever. They can pick up the phone, they can share ideas, they can speak to them, and be inclusive about how you approach that. And I think in a way that the role modeling for that has to come from your senior management team, your CEO, in the kind of messaging, in the communication they're having with their staff. And obviously, reinforce perhaps again with these lunch and learn sessions, because it's a great morale booster. If people think they can come up with new ideas and they'll be supported and be able to see those through, then obviously that's a really positive result in a very difficult period we're in.
Anything you'd like to add, Sue?
Yeah, I was going to add, obviously, those that are on furlough, they can undertake e-learning, and this is a fantastic opportunity to think about upskilling all of those. They've got the time now. Normally, nobody has the time when they're working to actually do the training, and you could offer training that actually is taking them in a different direction, looking at the company going in a different direction. Very cost-effective training courses out there, as well as just generally getting them up to date with maybe their health and safety training, and making sure that when the company's back together, everybody's up to date, and even those on furlough have been kept engaged with the way that the organisation may well be moving.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of our questions. We haven't received any updates or requests or changes while we've been online. I just want to say a massive thank you to Sue Beebe, who works for the HR department. If you're interested in what her company does, their web address is the hrdepartment.co.uk. And also an enormous thank you to Diane from Working Families. Similarly, if you're interested in what they do, Working Families are online. We have put a few polls up, depending on whether you're an employee or an employer. I've certainly learned a lot today. And as somebody who has personally set up working in the shed at the bottom of the garden, it's been really insightful for me to actually see what people are trying and what they're doing and how they're adapting to it. I think it's fair to say that over the next weeks and months, we will really come to terms with this working from home and how it benefits society. So I would normally, if I was at the event, say a big round of applause, but certainly a massive thank you to Sue, and thank you for joining us. And a huge thank you to Diane as well. We hope to see you again soon on a Business Talk webinar, and thank you both very much.